Remember the Forsworn? You might remember them as the group you have to fight randomly as part of the main quest. You might remember them as the group with a secret king you help free from Markarth jail. But which is the truth? Are they a ragtag group of freedom fighters who want their land back, or are they just raiders who happen to have a penchant for worshipping demons on their free time? Oh, and should you kill or free Madanach? Well, I aim to answer those questions with evidence. So, if you're on the fence or you just want to yell at me because I disagree with you, stay tuned. Let's try and piece this out right from the beginning. On the one hand, the Forsworn see themselves as freedom fighters. The Reachmen were conquered in ancient times wrongfully. They simply happened to be somewhere before anyone else, and that place happened to have valuable resources other people wanted.
This was our land. We were here first. Then the Nords came and put chains on us, forbid us from worshipping our gods. Some of us refused to bow.
As if that wasn't enough, in more recent times, they're used as slave labor to bring that resource to their rulers.
If someone joins the Forsworn, we haul him to the mines. Every prisoner in the Reach is just another worker for our family.
On the other hand, the Empire, and for today's video, I will be using Empire and Stormcloak and Nords interchangeably, as it doesn't really matter, in the sense that the Forsworn don't see a huge difference. Whoever you define as the other side opposing the Forsworn, see them as terrorists. Whoever you see on the throne, you have a governing body that is facing open rebellion by its citizens and has therefore rightfully imprisoned them in response. This particular demographic of citizens will act out violently anytime they see an opportunity and have taken to the hills like barbarians to kill other random citizens until they are given their political goals.
Traveling in the Reach is dangerous. You need a good carriage.
Keep your eyes open for Forsworn when you're on the roads.
Gather the Legion and drive those blasted beasts out of the Reach for good.
And what do Legion soldiers know about the hills of the Reach and the caves that make up those hills? The Forsworn can hide and ambush every assault.
The safety of the city and our settlements must be our only concern, England. The rest of the Reach is on its own.
Cowards, both of you. My father would not sit idly back and wait while evil men take over his lands. We're done discussing this for now.
If the Forsworn aren't attacking my town, the Nords are trying to force me off it.
Here again, Bethesda has faced us with an impossible choice. But I think I have figured out the frame where this all makes sense. Instead of turning back time 4,000 years to find out who did what first, let's go back 25 years and explore the context around the Markarth Incident before we get into what we should do during the events of Skyrim. All that we have for sources on this are the books in-game. I know there is a lot of Elder Scrolls Online content that depicts the Reach in a different era, and I have purposefully excluded that from this video. Why? Well, it takes place almost 1,000 years before Skyrim, so there's literally no relation between those Reachmen and these Reachmen. For reference, that would be like trying to judge how the people of the UK live now based on historical documents from when England was still an Anglo-Saxon kingdom ruled by a Danish Viking king in 1016. So we only really have the documents and characters in-game to judge these characters in-game. Some of these documents are imperfect and dishonest, but hey, we gotta use them. Now that also means I'm gonna be reading a book here, actually, 2 of them, and it's pretty boring, so I'm gonna leave a timestamp here of where you can skip if you've already read the books or you just don't want to listen to me read for like 10 full minutes. But first, we're gonna read a couple books, and then we'll turn to the primary sources of people who were actually there and exist in the game that we can talk to. That leaves us, unfortunately, only with the writings of Arianus Arius and his books The Bear of Markarth and The Madmen of the Reach. In some ways, I wish I could just chalk these up by saying, these books are made-up imperial propaganda written to slander Nords and make the Reach and the Empire out to be intelligent. But I haven't really seen anyone rip into these claims made by these books, and so unfortunately it falls to me. There are also at least one nugget of truth in each book that cannot be found anywhere else in Skyrim, and we really need those truths to complete the entire picture. I really wish it wasn't so, but let's get into it. I'll be contrasting what the book says with what people in the game say, so if you pick up on the fact that a lot of what's in this book is just blatantly false, don't worry, I will get to it. We can start with the Madmen of the Reach, because it brings up a crucial distinction. Reachmen versus Forsworn. The notes start with the title, where Madmen is in quotes, suggesting that the Forsworn actually aren't mad. Then he starts out, since the legendary victory of Tiber Septim over the barbarian natives in the Battle of Old Hroldan, Imperial and Nord scholarship has cast the people of the Reach as little more than savages, prone to irrational fits of violence, worshipping old, heretical gods, and fetishizing beasts and nature spirits that any civilized person would best well avoid. In truth, these accounts are little more than victors' essays, and a perspective narrowed by the Empire's constant strife with the ancient, proud people that have lived on this land far before Tiber Septim walked the soil of Tamriel. In light of this, I hope to create a more complete, accurate, and fair assessment of a group that has long suffered under the role of enemy, troublemakers, and them. Alright, so here we have our first note about Arianas. His tone is clear. Reachmen good, Empire and Nords bad. If the question is between Nords and Empire, then the tone is Empire good, Nords bad. When he admits things that help his cause, he is clear. When he is forced to admit things that do not help his cause, it is with a sneering, begrudging air about his words. In short, you cannot trust his opinions. His stated purpose does not matter, unless you are able to see past the layers of sarcasm and dodgy admonition. He says his purpose here is to give an accurate idea of the Reachmen, rather than painting them as savages. So let's see if he succeeds. He continues, let us begin with the Forsworn, the so-called Madmen of the Reach. The Imperial Legion classifies them as little more than brigands, noting their constant raids and ambushes within the hold, but none of their military reports asks the question, why? If they were merely a group of bandits, surely they would be focused on acquiring gold and minimizing deaths behind their own. But the opposite is true of the Forsworn attacks. Large sums of coin are often left behind, and their fighters easily throw away their lives rather than risk capture by Imperial soldiers. This is a classic. Okay, you'll see this in real life too if you pay attention. Here we have what we call a distinction without a difference, with the author saying they aren't bandits because they aren't trying to rob you for your gold. And while that is a distinct classification, it makes no difference. Do the Imperial soldiers, silver miners, traders, travelers, farmers in Markarth, do they care why the painted, animal pelt-wearing savage is trying to kill them? Probably not. It makes no difference. In fact, pointing out that the Reachmen don't actually want money, but are killing because their gods told them to, well, that probably doesn't do them the favor you hope it would. Anyway, moving on. He continues, it is this incongruity that led me to Markarth, the capital city of the Reach, in search of answers. There, I met one of the native peoples, an old woman who preferred not to be named in my writings. She told me of her family's long history, how she believes they originally came from High Rock, home of the Bretons, which would explain the similar faces and stature of the two peoples. How the Nords came and took their land, their gods, and their culture from them. When asked about the Forsworn, the old woman would say that they are the real men and women of the Reach, those that refused to give in to the Nords, those that still practiced the ancient traditions that the rest of their people had abandoned in exchange for peace. Now, here again we come to the crux of the writing. All the bluster and bad faith arguments take a pause here, and we do, against Arianas' best efforts, get some real information. Let's zoom in on the sentence, when asked about the Forsworn, the old woman would say that they are the real men and women of the Reach, those that refuse to give in to the Nords, those that still practice the ancient traditions that the rest of their people had abandoned in exchange for peace. So, we find that there are two distinct groups here. He's speaking to a Reachman. The Reachmen had given up their beliefs for peace, and this Reachman respects the Forsworn. The Forsworn showed up after Madanach was imprisoned and are bringing back the old beliefs. This is the main question we need answered. What were the Reachmen like for the 651 years between when Tiber Septim reconquered the Reach in 2nd Era 852 and when Madanach led his uprising in 4th Era 174? And here's our answer. For that period of time, the Reachmen laid down their beliefs and lived peacefully with the Nords. It's one thing to remember the good old days and reminisce on them 6 centuries later, as this woman does, and it's another to start a violent faction in the name of reconquering your ancestral land. But let's finish the book, shall we? He finishes, "In time, I was able to create a trust with many more natives in my search that corroborate the old woman's story. By chance, one of them arranged a meeting between myself and what I thought was an elder member of his village. I was shocked to find that I was led to a camp filled with animal skulls, severed heads, and the still beating hearts that I had read about from the military reports back in the Imperial City. There, I met Kortorin, a Forsworn, who seemed amused at the prospect of me writing down his story, which I quote in full below. You want to know who the Forsworn are? We are the people who must pillage our own land, burn our own ground. We are the scourge of the Nords, the axe that falls in the dark, the scream before the gods claim your soul. We are the true sons and daughters of the Reach. The spirit and hags have lived here from the beginning, and they are on our side. Go back and tell your empire that we will have our own kingdom again, and on that day, we will be the ones burying your dead in a land that is no longer yours." So our dear author tries to make a book where he says the Forsworn are not violent, and ends it with him going to a camp full of severed heads and beating hearts, and then quotes a leader threatening violence against the Empire. Bravo, Arianus. Now, let's look at our secondary source, the Bear of Markarth. It's about the Markarth Incident, starring Ulfric Stormcloak. His tone is essentially the same. It's equally as sneering and mocking, so I hope you liked his voice the first time. It's the same this time. Let's just get started. He says, Ulfric Stormcloak is considered a hero by many for his part in quelling the Forsworn uprising. It is said that when the Empire abandoned Skyrim, the natives of the Reach rebelled, undoubtedly due to the Nords' poor treatment of them. Ulfric Stormcloak and his militia was there to retake their land from the Forsworn. In all the bravado and epic yarns the Skald compose of his exploits, you would think Ulfric to be a giant of a man, equal to that of Tiber Septim in his cunning, leadership, and decisive actions. Alright, so right off the bat, there aren't really any claims here. This paragraph is all tone. Basically, he calls into doubt whether there was an uprising, whether the Nords mistreated the Reachmen, and that Ulfric is smart and, large, I guess? Most of the doubt he casts is in this opening paragraph is actually disproved later in this same document, so I don't really know how seriously to take it. Like he says, it's said that when the Empire abandoned Skyrim and the natives of the Reach rebelled, Ulfric Stormcloak and his militia were there to retake their land from the Forsworn. And then literally in the next paragraph he says, yes, from 4th Era 174 to 176, the Forsworn did in fact rule over the Reach as an independent kingdom from Skyrim, and yes, Ulfric Stormcloak did quell the rebellion without Imperial assistance. So this is very clearly propaganda. It's more of an opinion piece. All that we've established so far is that the author doesn't like Nords. Anyway, let's keep reading. But the truth is far more revealing. Yes, from 4th Era 174 to 176, the Forsworn did, in fact, rule over the Reach as an independent kingdom from Skyrim. Yes, this was accomplished while the Empire was beset by the Aldmeri Dominion forces and could not send the Legion to re-establish order. And yes, Ulfric Stormcloak did quell the rebellion without Imperial assistance. That much is true, but what the bards often fail to tell in their stories is that the Forsworn kingdom was quite peaceful for those 2 years they were in power. Alright, so here we have some facts. According to Arianus, the Forsworn did rebel during the war, and they were put down by Ulfric without Imperial assistance because the Empire could not send a legion. Apparently, the Reachmen were peaceful during their 2 years in charge. So far, so good. Though the tone is still kind of smarmy and backhanded unkindness, it does establish something that is true. Jarl Hrolfdir, you can't meet him in game, he went outside Imperial channels to get help from Ulfric. He did this because the Empire could not help, and he wanted his throne back. However, the next line is possibly the most important in the entire book. He says, "True, some crimes were committed against former Nord landowners, often those accused of being the harshest toward their native workers. But on the whole, the Forsworn ruled their lands fairly, and were making overtures to be recognized by the Empire as a legitimate kingdom." Now, this kind of negates his arguments that there was peace for 2 years, doesn't it? The word crimes is doing a lot of heavy lifting. What crimes? What crimes are we talking about here? This one line is really what we needed out of this book. The author clearly does not want to admit it, but the Forsworn were a violent uprising. It is implied that this violence was earned because Nord landowners were harsh towards the Reachmen workers, but without any details, we only know one thing. In response to being harsh, the Reachmen committed crimes against Nord. Now, pause, I just want to make a distinction here. The Reachmen at this point are not slaves. They're equal citizens. They are imperial citizens in a Nord city. They're free to own farms. They're free to work silver mines. They're free to do whatever anyone is free to do. Okay? Remember that. It's important. Most of our sources in game, including this book, will gloss over the fact that this was a violent uprising. So, please remember. Okay, moving on, we have, in the wake of the aftermath of the Great War, you can imagine the backlog on stately matters the Empire had. Before a peace treaty could be resolved with the Forsworn, a militia led by Ulfric Stormcloak sieged the gates of their capital, Markarth. What happened during the battle was war, but what happened after the battle is nothing short of war crimes. Here again, the author makes an excuse for why the Empire did not step in, then fails to extend that courtesy to the Nords. I mean, you can see what's happening here, right? When the Forsworn have an admittedly violent uprising, breaking the law and violating social and literal contracts, it's war. But when the Nords restore order and put down a violent uprising in the name of the Jarl, it's a war crime. I mean, this is biased. We know this. Now, we get into the actual Markarth Incident. Again, you could probably assume this is the most important part of the book. He goes, "Every official who worked for the Forsworn was put to the sword, even after they had surrendered. Native women were tortured to give up the names of Forsworn fighters who had fled the city or were in the hills of the Reach. Anyone who lived in the city, Forsworn and Nord alike, were executed if they had not fought with Ulfric and his men when they breached the gates. You are with us, or you are against Skyrim," was the message on Ulfric's lips as he ordered the deaths of shoekeepers, farmers, the elderly, and any child old enough to lift a sword that had failed in the call to fight with him. Now, here again, we're given some facts. Pretty brutal ones. There are characters who corroborate the story, so we can assume it is correct. Ulfric was ruthless to the Reachmen. In the eyes of this author, this was a completely unjustified use of violence against the Reach, despite the fact that they had used violence years earlier. We'll circle back to that, but for now, Ulfric did do this. Torture, beheadings, let's assume it's all true. Arianus continues, "So when a grateful empire accepted Ulfric's victory and sent soldiers to re-establish the rule of law in the Reach, it was no surprise that he would demand to be allowed to worship Talos freely before the Legion could enter. With chaos running through the streets of Markarth and the reports of deaths rising every day, the Empire had no choice but to grant Ulfric and his men their worship. We allowed them to worship Talos in full violation of the White Gold Concordant with the Aldmeri Dominion, which recognizes the elven belief that Talos, as a human, cannot be one with the Divines. In jeopardizing the treaty that so many sacrificed for during the Great War, the Empire was wrong. But what choice did we have, I ask you? Against the Bear of Markarth, Ulfric Stormcloak, no is not an answer." So we have this sort of narrative and this is probably what's going to be undermined later in this video, but the narrative, according to this guy, peace was already on the way, that contracts were all but signed, and then Ulfric showed up and just ruined everything. That's not true. We're going to talk to Jarl Igmund about his father, the Jarl that was Jarl during that time, and he was the one who asked Ulfric to show up. So I reject that outright. I'll get to the evidence in a minute.
Forsworn had taken over Markarth, and Ulfric and his men drove them out. Empire promised they'd be free to worship Talos afterwards. Pity no one told the elves.
That's right. Whole group of the natives called the Forsworn rose up against the Nords. Drove them out. Then Ulfric Stormcloak came with his militia. That must have been a sight to see him shouting folks to death. You'd think that'd be the end of it. Those Forsworn are still in the hills, and they're as wild as wolves.
Whole group of those Thalmor came, and they demanded Ulfric's arrest.
And then also we have this sort of, I don't know, dialogue that Ulfric was like killing people every day in order to push a deal going forward with the Empire. That also, I think, is false. So, anyways.
Aldmeri Dominion invaded the Imperial City. The Legion all but turned a blind eye to the other provinces. Many of the disgruntled natives of the Reach used the opportunity to depose the Empire and founded what they called an independent kingdom. It was little more than a chaotic uprising, but the Reach was removed from Imperial authority for 2 years before we reclaimed it. But the leaders of the uprising refused our offers of peace. They fled into the hills and became the Forsworn. It all started here, this rebellion. When the Empire lost the Reach during the Great War, we became desperate. We promised a group of Nord militia free worship in exchange for their help retaking the hold. Then the elves found out about it.
This is still interesting. Here, the allowance of Talos worship is permitted, in the author's eyes, to stop Ulfric from committing what we might reasonably call an act of genocide. Every day they waited, more Reachmen died. We'll have to circle back to the validity of this, but it's a perspective that I hadn't considered because no one else says it. Also, if this is true, consider that the genocide with Ulfric in charge turned into an active enslavement with the Empire back in charge. So it's not like they really solved anything for the betterment of anyone involved, and certainly not for the Reachmen. They went from killing them to holding them as slaves. With that, we have finished our 2 books on the subject. Thank goodness, am I right? And despite the best efforts of an Imperial scholar, we did learn something from his books. 1, the Reachmen were peaceful for centuries with the Nords, while they lived as modern Imperial citizens. And 2, seemingly without a catalyst, Madanach woke up one day and for no reason at all decided it was time for the creation of a violent cult that used said violence to take out the existing powers in Markarth, and only complained when that same violence came back to take him out of power. In fact, to be fair, we'll see later, Madanach doesn't really complain about this at all. He knew what he was doing had risks, and he was only surprised that he lived through it. Now, let's turn to the eyewitnesses in the game. These are what we consider first sources, our primary sources. The books are secondary sources. The scholar wasn't there. I don't necessarily think that we need to, but for the sake of thoroughness, let's retrace our steps. Here's what happened during the Markarth Incident. Madanach, and I think there is enough evidence that it was mostly just Madanach and some loyalists here at this point, he led the Reachmen in a violent uprising where he ruled Markarth, and the Reachmen outside the city overthrew their landowners, who were mostly Nords.
During their war with the elves, we had our moment. We drove the Nords out of the Reach in a great uprising.
We know this was violent, but we are unsure exactly how violent, or the exact nature of the violence. For 2 years, Madanach ruled as though this were a regular kingdom, as though he and his men did not use violence to get where they had gotten, and as though they were not sitting on a throne that was only given power and meaning by the very people he had just violently extricated from Markarth.
I had Markarth. My men and I drove the Nords out. We had won. So we thought.
In his mind, he was simply inheriting his birthright. As an aside, understand that while the city of Markarth was built by the dwarves, and the Reachmen got there first after the dwarves left, the rest of Markarth represents literally thousands of years of investiture by groups that were not Reachmen. And the Reachmen would see the mines and mills and farms returned to nothing rather than building them up.
Those are the Forsworn. The Forsworn follow the old ways. Some of those are best forgotten. Blood sacrifices, communing with Daedra, It's the road to ruin.
But I digress. Ulfric gets home from war and was petitioned by the former Jarl Hrolfdir, behind the Empire's back, to reclaim the city for him, in exchange for Talos worship being allowed. This means Talos was not used as a prize against the bargaining chip of Reachman lives, as Arrhenius claims, where Ulfric was essentially killing until the Empire complied.
When the Empire lost the Reach during the Great War, we became desperate. We promised a group of Nord militia free worship in exchange for their help retaking the hold. Then the elves found out about it. We were forced to arrest all of them. Ulfric Stormcloak, their leader, used the whole thing as proof that the Empire had abandoned Skyrim. The rebels called it the Markarth Incident. It was the founding day for the Stormcloaks, and where this war really started.
Instead, the deal went off without a hitch, and the terms were agreed between two Nords without either holding the other side hostage to agree at all, until the Thalmor caught wind of it, and then Ulfric was rounded up, in part by Hrolfdir, and sent to jail.
That would be Jarl Igmund, young for a ruler of the Hold, especially the Reach. Wasn't surprising he stayed loyal to the Empire. His father helped capture Ulfric Stormcloak after the Markarth Incident.
At this point, Hrolfdir went to negotiate a peace with the Reachmen, as the Forsworn were a different group and they were all in prison. He was killed for his trouble.
My father died trying to negotiate with the Forsworn, back when that was possible. They took his shield to those Hargraven beasts they consort with. I need you to bring it home where it belongs.
However, while Ulfric was there, it is correct to say that he killed men, women, and children. That is corroborated across multiple eyewitnesses.
Then Ulfric and his men came. Those of us who didn't run were executed, except for myself, my king, and a handful of others.
I had a daughter once. She'd be 23 this year. Married to some hot-headed silver worker, or maybe on her own, learning the herb trade. The Nords didn't care who was and who wasn't involved in the Forsworn uprising. I had spoken to Madanach once. That was enough. But my little Aethra didn't want to see her papa leave her. She pleaded to the Jarl to take her instead. And after they made me watch as her head rolled off the block, they threw me in here anyway to dig up their silver. Retribution was swift. I was captured, quickly tried, and sentenced to death. But my execution never came. Dhonar's Silverblood stopped it. He wanted the Forsworn at his call, that I would point their rage at his enemies and spare his allies. And I have.
The claim that torture was used to find other Forsworn isn't corroborated by multiple eyewitnesses, but I see no reason to disbelieve that. Remember that Ulfric had escaped a Thalmor torture situation himself not long prior, and that at this very time he was in regular contact with a Thalmor agent and presumably being manipulated by them to believe his actions would lead to a favorable outcome for him. In other words, he had learned how to torture and put down an uprising from the best, and you cannot argue the efficiency of what he was doing, only the efficacy of what he was doing. In fact, if Ulfric had been allowed to continue, I feel very strongly that he would have destroyed the Forsworn entirely. Not the Reachmen. The peaceful Reachmen that were willing to assimilate to the Empire would have remained, but anyone who spoke to Madanach would have been put down, which, again, is exactly how you would prevent something like this from happening in the future. It was Madanach who endangered the Reachmen, not Ulfric bringing consequences for their terrorist actions. He was stopped from doing this, from finishing the job, however. All so Stormcloak supporter family, the Silverbloods, could use the Forsworn to their advantage.
The Empire is destroying everything Skyrim stands for. We own Sidna Mine, best prison in Skyrim, and source of half the wealth in this city. We keep the Reach safe. We flood Markarth with wealth. But does the Jarl listen to us when we want to say? No. He's busy forgetting that Ulfric Stormcloak saved this city from the Forsworn. Ulfric's a hero, not a damn criminal. The Imperials were weak. They created this Forsworn problem. But now that we're in charge, we'll solve it. Once the war is over, I'll petition Ulfric to send the militia, and we'll cleanse the Reach of this menace. Then the Forsworn will be where they belong, in the mines, bringing us wealth.
To be clear, what Ulfric did was wrong morally, but it probably would have worked. If he had finished the job, the Forsworn would be a distant memory by the events of Skyrim. Instead of being killed by the Forsworn every 5 minutes, we would instead be treated to NPCs saying, "Remember that crazy shit Ulfric did 25 years ago?" You go ahead and decide which one is worse. Hundreds of Reachmen die every day. No, I don't have a source for that.
My source is that I made it the f*** up.
But between them dying and them killing their victims, I'm sure it's gotta be a lot. If Ulfric had just killed the original dozens or hundreds that had been involved, he would have actually been saving lives by the time of Skyrim. Now, we know what the Reach was like before the Markarth Incident, what happened during the Markarth Incident, and now it's time to turn to what happened for the 25 years after the Markarth Incident and before the events of Skyrim, because it's time to officially endorse the Reachmen. I think this is the easiest to track, and it's kind of what the game forces you to go through as part of the Forsworn conspiracy. I have also covered many of the things in my last 2 videos, so if you want to see one side and then the other side of the argument, go ahead and watch those. Because of that, I'll just go ahead and speed run through everything that happened. Over the next 25 years, the Silverbloods would use the Forsworn to destroy their rivals.
A man goes crazy in the market. Everyone knows he's a Forsworn agent. Guards do nothing but clean up the mess. It all started when I was a boy. My father owned one of the mines, rare for anyone who isn't a Nord. He was killed. Guards said it was just a madman, but everyone knew the murderer was a member of the Forsworn. I've been trying to find out why ever since.
If the Forsworn aren't attacking my town, the Nords are trying to force me off it. My family has owned Karthwasten for generations. Rare for anyone in the Reach that isn't a Nord. Not that it does me any good. Nords think I'm working for the Forsworn. Forsworn think I'm working for the Nords. Robbery is what it is. The Silverbloods are trying to muscle in on my land. Forsworn attack the mines, and suddenly all these sellswords show up to help. They won't let anyone work until I sell it off.
Madanach was kept alive and in prison. Thonar would tell him to tell Nepos the Nose to tell the Forsworn agents what to do, including destroying other people's mines, killing people, and attacking rivals.
You want to know what the Forsworn really are? They're my puppets. I have their king rotting in Sidna Mine. He was supposed to keep them under control. When their uprising was crushed, I had Madanach brought to me. He was a wild animal, but a useful one. I offered him a stay from execution if he used his influence to deal with any annoyances that came up. Competitors, agents, idiots. So I've let him run his little Forsworn rebellion from inside Sidna Mine. Now he's out of control.
I've been playing this game for almost 20 years, sending the young to their deaths, all in the name of the Forsworn. And I'm tired. So tired. Because my king told me to. Madanach. When the uprising fell at the hands of the Nords, they threw him in the mines. I don't know how, but he lives. I get his messages, and I hand out his orders without question. I'm just a servant to my king, Madanach.
But my execution never came. Thonar's Silverblood stopped it. He wanted the Forsworn at his call, that I would point their rage at his enemies and spare his allies. And I have. Humiliating at first, but I knew he would let his guard down eventually, that he would come to trust I was under control.
In addition, anytime someone did something the Silverbloods did not like, they would accuse them of being a Forsworn and send them to prison, where they and the rest of the Forsworn would mine silver.
If someone joins the Forsworn, we haul him to the mines. Every prisoner in the Reach is just another worker for our family.
So, the Silverbloods would get rich off the Forsworn in a literal sense, in their prison, directly, and then they would get rich off the Forsworn in a more metaphorical sense, outside their prison, indirectly. The Forsworn outside the city were allowed to expand, and in some ways, thrive directly, because as long as they stayed away from Markarth and the mines in the hold, the Silverbloods could take care of everything else, effectively ignoring that they were allowing a massive army to form out in the hills. So I think that puts us all on the same page. I will now make my conclusion. In my opinion, all of this is Madanach's fault. Skyrim sets us at a curious crossroads where many of the decisions being made by you today are the results of decisions made decades earlier. The Civil War sets us up to choose a terrible, self-aggrandizing king on one side, or else ignore the atrocities committed by an empire in decline, all in response to the Great War 25 years ago. All the justifications took place 25 years ago, but we are forced to choose between two bad decisions today. This choice is no different. We believe that we are responding to all the slavery and manipulations of the Silverbloods over the last 25 years. And if you were only responding to that, you might feel justified in empowering the weak, imprisoned Madanach. But that's not what we're responding to, not really. Just because Madanach started a war 25 years ago does not make him innocent of starting that war. And just because someone seized the opportunity to use him for their own ends also doesn't change the fact that it all comes back to him. I think it's entirely possible that if we had seen the violence that Madanach had put Markarth to, we would have agreed with Ulfric. We don't have to like it, but maybe we'd see why it was necessary. People bring up that they killed Forsworn children, but conveniently leave out all the Nord and Imperial children that were killed by the Forsworn when they purged the city. Remember that by all accounts we have, the entire Reach was a cohesive and peaceful place before Madanach came to power. Madanach plunged the Reach into a violent war for his sake. He reached for power for himself, and whatever is left over would be left for his people. If you feel bad for him, remember that 25 years in prison is a light sentence for overthrowing your government and killing people who got in your way. Ulfric's response to that was a valid one, if maybe a little excessive. If there is an idealist terrorist faction that infects people with the ideas of killing farmers and townspeople they have lived peacefully side by side with for centuries, you have to root that out. Is it harsh to kill anyone who spoke to Madanach even once or expressed any loyalty to him? Of course, but you can see the result of leaving the ideas out there. They occur in Skyrim. How else could you be sure they wouldn't come back? Markarth is a hellhole. There are violent brigands who are ideologically possessed everywhere you go. There are ideas you cannot coexist with. And if those ideas are, my ancestors claimed this land 4,000 years ago, so any amount of violence I use today is warranted to get it back. Also, I worship demons and cut out people's hearts to achieve immortality for my best warriors. Well, that's one of those things. Ulfric's mistake, as with all of his mistakes we see in game, is his lust for power. He hoped to empower his loyalist friends by leaving Madanach alive. And well, who can argue? He did just that. I also want to shout out this as one of the best depictions of right to rule I've ever seen. See, Markarth, built by the dwarves, is a resource. It has no rightful owner anymore. With the dwarves gone and the snow elves insane, there are no original owners or debtors you need to worry about. For the purposes of this game, it's a natural resource. There is no direct successor to it. No one has any rights to it at all. It might be easier to imagine it as a river or a hill. And like a river, it may as well have been placed there by whatever god you believe in for the benefit of all. The Reachmen found it first, and now their argument is essentially, I didn't build this, I didn't develop it, I am not interested in making it better or sharing it with anyone else. And yet, no one has any rights to this but me. And we see this in real life, don't we? Companies that take the water from the ground, the oil and natural resources that were already here when all of us were born, and then cynically package it and sell it back to us. Somehow, we all end up with less water, and they make billions. Not trying to make any commentary here, just an interesting idea we get to play with here. Do I sound political to you? I hope not. But I do hope you see through the lies that greedy people will try and sell you. Anyway, on one side, there is a government that wants to make an ancient city safe for anyone who wants to live there, so long as they comply with laws that everyone has to follow.
Good to have you by my side, friend. I need reliable people around.
And on the other side, there is a group that insists on making a racially pure ethno-state based on events from 4,000 years ago.
This was our land. We were here first.
Would look
The Reach belongs to the Forsworn!
Let me offer you a warning. Beware the Forsworn. No place in the Reach is safe from us now.
Interesting. Oh, and of course, then there's the Silverbloods. They gotta go. Also, refusing to let Thongvor sit the mournful throne is a genuinely valid reason to pick the Empire over the Stormcloaks. So, if you want more of those reasons, I'll link the video there where I list the rest of them. For what it's worth to me, this all started, and the blame rests almost entirely on Madanach. If he did not choose to pursue power, Markarth would presumably be as influential and prosperous as any other hold, and probably better off than many of them. But that still isn't the question you have left to you. Let's answer the big one officially, okay? The question Bethesda hands you is not should you stop Madanach from starting his uprising. It's with all the nuance and violence past, what do you do now, and should you kill Madanach or let him live? For the sake of this argument, I'm going to assume a few things. We have to assume that Madanach will be able to unite the Forsworn as king.
This is where it will begin. A new uprising. We'll have our freedom one day.
I'm skeptical that that's the case, but for the sake of the argument, we are to understand our choice as, do we want the Silverbloods to rule Markarth without being able to manipulate the Forsworn into doing what they want? Or do we want the Forsworn to be able to rule the Reach without the influence of the Silverbloods? Now, unfortunately, everything that I'm about to say requires speculation and is not shown in game. However, I think it's safe to assume, putting aside all that could go wrong with this for the sake of argument, that the Forsworn, if they are not being legally protected by the conniving Silverbloods, and without the leadership of a free Madanach, would be attacked in earnest. Their caves would be emptied, their redoubts destroyed, their positions routed. On the other hand, and again setting aside much of the doubts I have with this scenario, it is to be assumed that the Reachmen could unite if you chose Madanach, and eventually he would sit the mournful throne. Which brings us to the same question, doesn't it? Who deserves to win, and what would be best for you, the player, and Skyrim as a whole going forward? And to that, my friends, I simply cannot empower a violent insurrectionist terrorist organization. Madanach cannot rule the Reach. I will not allow it. He's too egocentric, too bloodthirsty, and too unpredictable. He plunged his entire people into war and suffering, and for what? You can attribute much of the evil since that time 25 years ago to Thonar, and by all means, kill him too. But I fail to see how Madanach going free and improving the Forsworn's ability to kill will improve anything at this point. They both have to go. And if you're careful and a little selfish, you can get the unique armor and the unique ring. So kill them all and let God sort them out. But that's just my opinion, man. What do you think? I do not love the Silverbloods. And by the way, I think for me, the perfect ending is killing Madanach right after he gives you the armor, then killing Thonar. But again, for the sake of the argument here today, if you have to choose one, the lesser evil is killing Madanach. Thonar doesn't have his hit squad if you get rid of the Forsworn. So either way, the Forsworn have to go. A Thonar without Madanach is one who cannot really do anything anyway, though you can definitely rest assured he deserves his death. But condemning the Reach to more of this, with Madanach specifically warning you that no one is safe, not even you? Well, let's just be real. These aren't the good guys.
To help you remain tranquil in the face of almost certain death, smooth jazz will be deployed in 3, 2, 1.
I make weekly Bethesda content, and I covered both sides of this argument here and here. If you like what you saw, buy a plane and fly around with one of those ads, subscribe to Sistel Ravenrock, and subscribe. It really helps with the channel. And until next time, I'll see you around.